Federal Drive is presented by GEHA, Government Employees Health Association, proudly providing health and dental benefits to federal employees and their families. Visit GEHA.com.
In the 3 weeks since the General Services Administration updated its proposed regulations for the basic safeguarding of data within large language model artificial intelligence systems, vendors and other interested parties have officially submitted only a handful of comments. But that's not because there isn't a lack of interest or questions about the new proposed rule that GSA would apply to all schedule and government-wide acquisition contracts under their purview. The comments will likely start pouring in after GSA holds a listening session on July 14th in Washington, D.C. For more on what GSA included in the updated draft regulations and what questions still remain, Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller, joins me now. Jason, great to have you. Thanks for joining me.
Thank you, Terry.
All right, remind me and our listeners about what these draft regulations are and why GSA updated them.
This goes back to March when GSA released what they call a 9-page draft clause that would require vendors providing AI tools and services to the government and really through the GSA schedule contracts to meet a host of specific requirements, including ensuring things like only American AI systems are used, disclosing all AI systems used in the performance of such a service to the government, requiring the government to own all data, and really some custom developments. It was really this draft clause was really put a lot of pressure on industry, caused a lot of concern. I think GSA got a lot of feedback right away, and I think this caused a lot of concern in industry. So to GSA's credit, they took a full step back. They said, okay, let us get some of this feedback. Let us put a pause on this draft clause. And let us have a better, more complete, if you will, understanding of what's going on. And I think that's what we saw back in early June when they released the updated, I'll call it draft regulations for AI systems. And what this now does is not just apply to the schedules, but they actually said that we're going to apply this to all government-wide acquisition contracts. So think Oasis Plus, think Alliant 3, think Polaris, think anything that has a technology system or technology services, because they, Terry, they're going to have some AI in there these days.
With all of that feedback and that broad application, it's going to be really important that GSA get this right. What did they change in the update?
First of all, I think the whole approach they took was different. They didn't just put it out there saying, okay, here's what we're going to do. What do you think? They actually released an RFI. And in that RFI, they basically said, hey, here's some questions we want you to answer. Here are some things to think about. So, for instance, GSA asked vendors to weigh in on several big things like, does this change in the clause prescription adequately address previous concerns about the broadness of the previous clause that we just talked about? They asked things like, what about government data ownership and protection? How to define accountability for contractors? Is that clearly defined? They asked about the roles and responsibilities of the contractor, the large language model developer, the large language model system operator, so on and so forth. So they're asking for more questions. They actually also are asking about flow down clauses, right? So I'm the prime contractor, I have the contract, but I'm using AI as subcontractors. How does that flow down work? So a lot of these are really important questions. And, I talked to several different people and they all praised GSA. For instance, I spoke with Jose Arrieta. He's a former HHS CIO. He's a former director of GSA's IT schedule. So he has acquisition, he has technology. And today he's the founder of an AI company called Imagineer. And he called this the most consequential rule since probably FedRAMP, the cloud security program that was FedRAMP that we've seen. And what he said was, listen, they've done a lot of really good things with this. For instance, he talked about the government ownership and data requirements, the way they changed that. He goes, that was really smart. I also talked to Jessica Tillotman. She's the Associate Dean for Government Procurement Law Studies at the George Washington University. And she also says GSA addressed some of the problems that she saw, such as they got rid of the lawful use and mandatory Made in America provision. She said that was just not workable. She also talked about the separate flow down requirements for the LLM for, again, subcontractors and so on and so forth, the second tier, third tier subcontractors. She goes, now there's 4 different clauses, and GSA created an attestation provision to help mitigate some of those flow down requirements to prime contractors. So again, really smart things, really, really important changes that they made. So I think there's a lot of things that GSA listened, They heard, most importantly, and then they said, okay, how can we improve? And I think that's what this initial draft showed us.
And as you're having those conversations, Jason, and the listening session is coming up, what sort of feedback is left to give? What are people hoping that GSA will still address?
There's several big questions, and of course there are, because you're not going to get it right the first time, and I think that's what GSA put the RFI out for. But going back to something Jose Arrieta highlighted to me, he goes, there's a prohibition in there of foreign ownership requirements around LLMs. He goes, this day and age, that's really difficult because of the way development happens. It happens globally. And even, that's really going to be impactful to small and medium-sized businesses who are using a lot of open source software, a lot of things that are developed across the globe in different time zones. And he said, even for some of the larger companies, that may be a very difficult thing to do. So I think he wants something around how to ensure some, okay, if you're going to put a prohibition on foreign ownership, what does that really mean, and how much does that flow down? Another thing that came up, I think, around that Jessica Tillotman talked about was this idea of ideological neutrality. This is something that's big on the administration, the no woke AI, if you will. She says, what does that mean? She goes, yes, GSA tightened this a little bit, but that she believes that clause will cause a lot of problems for a lot of people, because what does compliance mean? How do you ensure compliance? She actually called ideological neutrality kind of a mushy term. And I think that's a very legal term because she's a lawyer, Another part is the GSA talked about benchmarks for testing for this woke AI. What are those benchmarks going to look like? So I think that's a definition that I think that will still come from GSA. So I think there's still a lot of these questions that are out there, that good questions. They make a lot of sense. We've seen progress. So one industry executive I saw said one thing that they're excited about is GSA wants to work with environment, the community, and to get this right. And that's a very positive sign.
It sounds like they're on the right path then. What are the next steps to get this to closure?
Well, the big thing that you mentioned is the July 14th listening session. Now, for folks who say, I want to go to that, unfortunately, registration closed July 3rd. But there may be an opportunity. Maybe GSA has a virtual option, but this is in person at Washington, D.C. at the George Washington University. And I think that listening session will be key. Now, the interesting thing about a listening session is not GSA presenting anything. I mean, they may present a very high level, hey, this is what we did. Now talk to us. But people are able to come up and present their questions, their suggestions, their recommendations, their concerns to GSA, who's able to take all those notes and then maybe apply it to how the future draft AI regulations will come out. So I think that's the one key thing. The other thing is, as I said, I checked the Office of Information and Regulatory Affairs website, the regulations.gov, that lists all the comments. There was only a handful. I think when I looked, maybe last week, it was 6. That's not a lot of comments for something that caused a lot of consternation across industry. So I think post this listening session, I'll be interested to see how many comments come in. This administration is getting a lot of comments. Terry, we talked when you were away about grants regulations and some changes, and they had over 3,600 comments on the changes to grants regulations. I would expect this AI clause to get hundreds, if not thousands, of comments as well. But again, I think after the listening session. So I think those are the two big things for me. And then, of course, the finalization. These things can take months and months to get through the comments and then to finalize them. So that's something maybe early in 2027.
That's Federal News Network's executive editor, Jason Miller. Jason, thanks for bringing this to the top of our to-do list.
Always a pleasure. Thank you, Terry.
Find his story at federalnewsnetwork.com.